All right. Well, we now come to probably one of my favorite learning experiences, the graphic organizer, which is really look at the big picture of the Bible. And so I'm going to share my screen with you. And we're going to go through this learning experience and help you to get ready for your master assessment on LE5, learning experience number 5, understanding the biblical narrative for personal study and growth. Okay, so when you think about this learning experience, the goal is for you to have within your own mind an understanding of the narrative story of the Bible. Meaning, I can go from Genesis through Revelation and I can talk you through the story. And as you do that, what you're going to find is you're going to be really growing your understanding, your love for God. You're going to see how the story is just magnificent, and then your place in the story. But at the heart of this is that you understand the narrative. So let's look at the first part. So, reading the biblical narrative. One of the things you're going to do and that you have been doing is just constantly be reading through the Bible. And when you're reading the biblical narrative, you're looking at Genesis through Esther in the Old Testament. And then you're going to look at the Gospels. And then you're going to look at the book of Acts. And then you're going to look at the book of Revelation. And that's going to give you this narrative. When you look at the other epistles, they're helping contribute to the narrative. Or in the Old Testament, when you're looking at the prophets, they're helping you to understand aspects of the narrative. They're speaking into the narrative. They're not really part of the narrative. So when you're reading the biblical narrative, you're really trying to understand what is the story? What is God doing in history? Because if I can understand what God's doing in history, then I can know my place in that historical progression that God is doing. Or I can help other people to understand what is your place in the story that God is unfolding in our world. So we need to really read the narrative and we need to know the narrative in order to be able to share that narrative with others. Okay, so for example, here is a one-page graphic organizer of my understanding of the story. And I can start in creation, that's the green bubble on the lower left. And then you see the nation of Israel, that's in the blue outline. And what's going to happen is you have the period, and you've all seen this because we've gone through this together. You have the primeval period, and that is the time before history actually starts, right? And so that's where we have um, God creating the Adam and Eve, and then that's the creation, right? And then we have the garden established. And then what's going to happen is 4 through chapters 11 in Genesis. And in that primeval period, you're going to see that God is going to show us how wicked the world actually becomes after the fall in Genesis 3. And then you're going to have the patriarchal bondage period and the wandering, and that's going to move from there to the period of the judges. You can have Ruth, we said, which is a diamond, and here's this Moabite woman. She's a Moabite, she's cursed, yet she shows the nation of Israel how they should have lived. She is there to shame them. Okay. And then we move from there to the kingdom period, the United Kingdom period. We have three main kings. We have Saul, David, Solomon, and their whole point is to the people wanted a king because the other nations had a king. But when we finally get to, and they all start out well, but they don't end well. And the difference for David and why David is seen as different than them is because he actually repents, after his sin with Bathsheba. But that doesn't mean there's not consequences to his sin, which there are. And then his kingdom is never the same. But when you get to Solomon, his divided heart results in a divided kingdom. So we have Israel to the north, 10 tribes, Judah to the south. And we just keep walking through this story. And then we get, it ends in failure. So you're now waiting for a Messiah. The Gospels then help us understand that. And you go from the Gospels then to the church age. And the church age starts in Jerusalem, there's Judea, Samaria, and to the remotest parts of the world. And then from that, we have the epistles, and that helps us know how to build the church. It's founded upon the foundation of the Gospels and the book of Acts. But then you have the actual epistles that tell you how to do church. So that's that. And then you have the end of the story in the book of Revelation, where you're going to have the culmination of all that God has been doing. The nation of Israel will have a place, and we see that in the millennial kingdom. And then finally, the new heaven and the new earth will come. So that's the story, and that's what your graphic organizer will be able to express. It doesn't have to be this one, obviously. You could have you could have one where you have creation, fall, rescue, and redemption and consummation. So that would have 5 movements. And you'd be able to talk through each of those movements and be able to share the narrative story. So the question then is, why is a graphic organizer important? And so I've given you five reasons why here. One is it's easy to remember, right? It's memorable for you because you're the one who created it, but it also can be very memorable for others where they can say, oh, okay, you got a bubble. Here's the Old Testament, right? You got a bubble, then you got a box, 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 and then you got split, and then you're going to have space, and then you have another box. And that's the Old Testament story. And then you just walk through it. Very easy to remember. It's transferable. If I can remember it and I can help you to remember it, then that means it's transferable, which means that you can then take that and give it to somebody else. And what we're doing is we're helping others to understand the nature of the Bible and how it actually fits together and how it works in their Christian life, because many people are really quite confused when it comes to the Bible. Hermeneutical aid. If I understand this, the story, the narrative that God has, then wherever I am, I relate that study to the larger context, which is the narrative, which is really important. So if I'm studying the book of Ephesians and I'm in chapter 2 and I see that the dividing wall has been knocked down between Jew and Greek, I'm like, well, I think I totally get that, because what happened was we know that God made a promise with Abraham, and that promise was that he's going to make him a great nation. Yet the nation continued not to be faithful to God. And so then God raises up the Gentiles, right? I mean, that's crazy, but he does. And we see that in Romans 9 through 11, that God raises up the Gentiles to make the Jews jealous that they'll return. And so this dividing wall that's broken is between the Gentiles and the remnant Jews, the ones that believe that they can actually relate now, not as enemies, but as family. And so that contributes. But if I understand the bigger picture, then I understand the more focused view of what I'm studying. Also, it helps us understand the Bible is incredibly integrated. The more I read and the more I understand the nature of the narrative story, I just see how it's so related, that God is in every element of every aspect of every story, and all those stories, they relate to who God is. And in the Old Testament, they're pointing towards Christ. And in the New Testament, they're pointing back to Christ. In the Gospels, they're expressing the person and the work of Jesus. And so this integration is a beautiful thing to see. And it helps us to worship and just to adore the amazing story and grace and mercy that God has, but also this justice that is an expression of his love, that he's going to protect those who are his, and he's going to punish those who are not, so that they don't harm those who are his. And it's very practical, right? Because if you understand the story, then you really know your place in the story. And that becomes important, especially as we're doing evangelism, as we're doing discipleship, and helping to mobilize and to enable and to empower our disciples to see their place in the narrative story. Okay, so we see that also that this learning experience number 5, this big picture of the Bible, is going to work hand in hand with learning experience 6, which is Bible study methods. The graphic organizer is the macro view. The Bible study methods is the micro view. And so it's important for us to realize how those two work hand in hand. And so let me go back here. And so what you want to be able to do when you do your master assessment is to be able to walk through and to talk about, yep, here's what my graphic organizer looks like. This is what I know about the narrative story. Here's how my character has been transformed by understanding how God is sovereign and he's working through every event in history. And then here's how it works itself out in the field. Here's how I've made it transferable. Here's how I've been able to share the story of the Bible narrative with others and how that relates to the gospel. Okay, and you want to be able to express all these things, and how has it impacted you? And that's what you're going to do during your master assessment. And we will enjoy hearing that from you. We'll enjoy just seeing how God has been ministering to you through his word and through understanding the larger picture of what he's doing in our world as it's been captured in the scriptures. So I wish I could be there to hear it, but if it's recorded, I'll be able to do that. But enjoy it. And I think that this is going to be a very enjoyable master assessment time for you. So enjoy, and thank you.